Narrator. Welcome back to the English Learning Podcast's Intermediate Guide series. Today we're shifting our focus to the intellectually stimulating world of discussing documentaries and educational content. In an era of unprecedented access to information, from streaming services brimming with docuseries to online courses and expert talks, engaging with nonfiction media offers incredible opportunities for learning and expanding our worldview. But merely consuming information is one thing. Articulating what we've learned, analyzing different perspectives, and engaging in thoughtful dialogue about complex topics is quite another. How do you summarize the key takeaways from a dense documentary without oversimplifying its message? What language helps you articulate your critical evaluation of the content, distinguish between fact and opinion, or respectfully challenge a presented viewpoint? And crucially, how do you facilitate a discussion that invites others to share their insights, deepening collective understanding, rather than merely reciting facts or opinions? This episode is designed to equip you with the essential vocabulary, analytical frameworks, and practical insights necessary to approach discussions about documentaries and educational content with confidence, critical thinking, and a genuine desire for intellectual exchange. Today's discussion moves beyond casual viewing, delving into the nuances of media literacy, rhetorical strategies in nonfiction storytelling, and the art of informed debate. We are privileged to host a conversation between Dr. Alastair Finch, a renowned media studies professor specializing in documentary film at the University of Edinburgh, Scotland, and Ms. Lena Petrova, an acclaimed educational content creator and host of the popular Knowledge Unlocked podcast, who produces her work from a vibrant studio in Berlin, Germany. Their dialogue will illuminate the best practices and common pitfalls in discussing documentaries and educational materials, offering you a richer understanding of how to transform passive consumption into active learning and engaging discourse. So, let's explore the intricacies and profound impact of truly mastering the discussion of documentaries and educational content. Alastair, Lena, it's a genuine pleasure to finally connect with you. Your work in creating accessible educational content is incredibly valuable. From your perspective, when someone has just engaged with a documentary or a piece of educational content, what are your initial, most crucial considerations for them to keep in mind before discussing it? Is it about immediately forming an opinion, or is there a more analytical first step? Lena, Alastair, the pleasure is entirely mutual. Your academic insights into media are so pertinent to how we present information. When someone has just engaged with a documentary or educational content, my initial consideration is always a more analytical first step rather than immediately forming a definitive opinion. It's crucial to first identify the core message or central argument the creator is trying to convey. Equally important is to recognize the intended audience and the rhetorical strategies used to present the information. Is it presented as purely factual, or is there a subtle persuasive agenda? This critical initial assessment allows for a more informed and nuanced discussion. My foundational groundwork always involves asking, what is the content trying to tell me and how is it doing it? Do you find that a failure to critically deconstruct the content is a common pitfall in discussions? Alastair, absolutely, Lena. Your emphasis on identifying the core message and recognizing rhetorical strategies is unequivocally fundamental. A failure to critically deconstruct the content is indeed one of the most common and detrimental pitfalls, often leading to superficial discussions, unexamined biases, or the passive acceptance of presented viewpoints. Without this analytical lens, discussions can become mere recitations of facts or unexamined opinions. My research shows that viewers who actively question the creator's intent, the evidence presented, and potential omissions significantly deepen their understanding and engagement. What specific linguistic strategies do you employ to summarize key takeaways from complex educational content without oversimplifying its message or losing its nuance? Lena, that's where concise articulation and strategic emphasis become paramount, Alastair. My primary strategy for summarizing key takeaways from complex educational content without oversimplifying involves a multi-pronged approach. First, I focus on identifying the big ideas, or overarching themes rather than getting bogged down in every single detail. Second, I use qualifying language to reflect any nuance or uncertainty present in the original material, such as, the documentary suggests that, it appears that, or, the research indicates a strong correlation, though not necessarily causation. This acknowledges complexity. Third, I prioritize clarity and conciseness, aiming to distill the essence of the message into digestible points. I often employ introductory phrases like, "The central premise is," "A key insight offered was," or "One of the most compelling arguments made was." This helps to frame the summary. For example, instead of saying, "The film was about climate change," I might say, "The documentary primarily explores the interconnectedness of economic policy and environmental degradation, suggesting that sustainable solutions require a paradigm shift in consumption patterns." Do you find that a tendency to make definitive statements, even when the original content is nuanced, is a common issue? Alastair. That's an excellent approach, Lena, and your use of qualifying language and focus on big ideas is precisely what's needed for nuanced summarization. And yes, a tendency to make definitive statements, even when the original content is nuanced or presents multiple perspectives, is a very common issue. This often stems from a desire for clarity or perhaps an unconscious bias to simplify complex information. My research suggests that encouraging a nuanced vocabulary helps to combat this. What role does critical evaluation of evidence and sources play in discussing documentaries and educational content, and how do you encourage others to engage with this aspect? Lena. Critical evaluation of evidence and sources is the bedrock of any meaningful discussion about documentaries and educational content, Alastair. Without it, we risk simply absorbing information uncritically. I actively encourage others to engage with this aspect by posing specific questions during discussions. For instance, what kind of evidence was presented to support this claim? Were there any counterarguments or alternative viewpoints that were not explored in depth? Who was the expert being interviewed and what might their perspective or affiliations be? Was the data presented visually compelling but perhaps lacking context? I emphasize looking for bias, conscious or unconscious, in the presentation as well as considering omissions, what wasn't said or shown. I also encourage checking facts against multiple reputable sources if a claim seems particularly strong or controversial. This systematic questioning helps develop media literacy. How do you approach the challenge of respectfully challenging a viewpoint presented in educational content or by another participant in a discussion, while still explaining your own perspective clearly and constructively? Alastair. Lena, your emphasis on asking specific questions about evidence, bias, and omissions is precisely the systematic approach needed for critical media literacy. The challenge of respectfully challenging a viewpoint is central to dynamic and productive discussions. My approach focuses on separating the argument from the person or creator, and on inviting further dialogue rather than asserting definitive disagreement. I use phrases that soften the challenge and frame it as an intellectual inquiry. For instance, instead of "That's wrong," I'd say, "I see the point being made, but I wonder if there's an alternative interpretation of the data here." Or, "While the documentary presents this perspective convincingly, it led me to question whether X factor was fully accounted for." I focus on the merits of their argument before introducing my own, perhaps saying, "I appreciate the insight on Y and it raises a valid point. However, my understanding based on Z suggests a slightly different conclusion because." I also use I statements to express my view without directly invalidating theirs. I found myself struggling with the premise that, or, "My concern here is that." This keeps the focus on the content and logic, fostering an environment where ideas can be robustly debated without personal attack. What are the common pitfalls individuals fall into when trying to discuss documentaries and educational content in greater detail, and how can they be avoided? Lena. Alastair, your strategies for respectful challenge and using I statements are invaluable for fostering constructive dialogue. The common pitfalls individuals fall into when trying to discuss documentaries and educational content in greater detail often include superficial analysis, where discussions remain at a surface level without delving into the underlying complexities or implications. Another pitfall is confirmation bias, where individuals only seek out or interpret information that confirms their existing beliefs, leading to closed-minded discussions. Point 1. Dismissing opposing views outright without engaging with their rationale is also common, which stifles intellectual exchange. Some might engage in information dumping, attempting to recount every single detail rather than synthesizing key takeaways, overwhelming other participants. Others might exhibit a lack of active listening, waiting for their turn to speak rather than truly absorbing and responding to others' points. Finally, there's the pitfall of personalizing disagreements, turning intellectual debates into personal attacks. To avoid these, participants should strive for intellectual humility, recognizing that their understanding might be incomplete. They should actively seek out counterarguments and genuinely try to understand them. Encouraging open-ended questions prompts deeper analysis and invites varied perspectives. Facilitators should model and enforce respectful dialogue norms. Focusing on shared inquiry rather than debate for the sake of winning helps keep discussions collaborative. How do you believe the sheer volume and accessibility of educational content in the digital age impacts individuals' ability to engage deeply and critically with specific pieces of content? Alistair. Lena, your diagnosis of pitfalls like confirmation bias and information dumping, along with your avoidance strategies, are incredibly perceptive and practical. The sheer volume and accessibility of educational content in the digital age presents a complex and somewhat paradoxical impact on individuals' ability to engage deeply and critically with specific pieces of content. On one hand, this abundance is a democratization of knowledge, offering unparalleled opportunities for learning across diverse subjects, from ancient history to cutting-edge science. It allows individuals to follow their curiosities wherever they lead. However, this very abundance can also lead to information fatigue, or shallow engagement. When confronted with an overwhelming amount of content, there's a tendency to skim, superficially consume multiple sources without truly internalizing or critically evaluating any of them. The focus shifts from depth to breadth. There's also the risk of filter bubbles and echo chambers, where algorithms reinforce existing beliefs by presenting only content that aligns with previous viewing habits, hindering exposure to diverse or challenging perspectives. Point 2. Consequently, while accessibility is a boon, it places a greater onus on individuals to develop strong curation and critical appraisal skills to distinguish quality content and engage with it meaningfully. In your final analysis, what are the ultimate rewards or transformations that an individual gains from truly mastering the art of discussing documentaries and educational content effectively? Lena. Alistair, your analysis of the complex impact of content volume is incredibly astute. Information fatigue is a very real challenge. The ultimate rewards or transformations that an individual gains from truly mastering the art of discussing documentaries and educational content effectively are manifold and deeply profound. It cultivates significantly sharper critical thinking and analytical skills, as they learn to deconstruct arguments, evaluate evidence, and identify biases not just in media, but in everyday information. Point 3. This leads to enhanced media literacy, making them less susceptible to misinformation and more discerning consumers of all content. They develop a greater capacity for nuanced understanding and intellectual humility, recognizing the complexity of issues and the validity of multiple perspectives. This fosters richer and more empathetic interpersonal communication, as they learn to engage in respectful dialogue even when disagreements arise. Beyond the intellectual, it often ignites a lifelong passion for learning and inquiry, transforming passive consumption into active knowledge-seeking. Perhaps most powerfully, it empowers individuals to become more informed and engaged citizens, capable of contributing meaningfully to societal discourse and making well-reasoned decisions. It's the difference between simply knowing facts and truly understanding the world. Narrator. What an exceptionally illuminating and profound conversation with Dr. Alistair Finch and Ms. Lena Petrova. Their expert insights have masterfully illuminated the critical nuances involved in transforming passive viewing into active learning and engaging discourse. We've explored everything from initial critical deconstruction and nuanced summarization to evaluating evidence and navigating the vast digital landscape. Their discussion powerfully underscores that mastering the discussion of documentaries and educational content is not merely an act of intellectual showing off, but a crucial skill for personal growth, critical engagement with the world, and fostering a more informed and understanding society. Now, let's consolidate some of the key vocabulary and concepts from their rich dialogue that you can integrate into your own discussions about learning and knowledge. Practice session. Expressing yourself. Let's revisit some valuable phrases and concepts from today's in-depth episode. Practice using these in your own discussions about documentaries and educational content. Analytical first step. An initial stage of critical thinking before forming an opinion. Unequivocally fundamental. Absolutely essential or crucial. Rhetorical strategies. Techniques used to persuade or influence. Point 4. Qualifying language. Words or phrases that limit or modify a statement, e.g., suggests, appears. Point 5. Big ideas or overarching themes. The main concepts or messages. Bedrock. The fundamental principle or foundation. Confirmation bias. The tendency to interpret information in a way that confirms one's existing beliefs. Information dumping. Providing too much unnecessary or unorganized information. Complex and somewhat paradoxical impact. An effect that is complicated and seems to contradict itself. Manifold and deeply profound. Many and having a very significant and deep effect. Choose 3 of these phrases and explain how they might relate to a documentary or educational content you have recently engaged with. For example, before discussing the environmental documentary, I tried to take an analytical first step to understand its rhetorical strategies and identify its big ideas, which I found to be unequivocally fundamental to a good discussion. The history lecture made a point about the bedrock of democracy, but I noticed a slight confirmation bias in its presentation of certain historical figures, despite its otherwise manifold and deeply profound insights. I found myself avoiding information dumping when summarizing the science documentary, instead using qualifying language like, it suggests that, to convey the nuance, acknowledging the complex and somewhat paradoxical impact of some of the data presented. Narrator. As Dr. Alistair Finch and Ms. Lena Petrova so eloquently articulated, mastering the art of discussing documentaries and educational content is a skill that empowers you to engage with the world more critically, learn more deeply, and contribute more thoughtfully to intellectual exchange. It's about transforming passive consumption into active inquiry, challenging assumptions, and building shared understanding. Point 6. By embracing critical thinking, precise language, and respectful dialogue, you can turn every learning experience into a profound opportunity for growth. Until our next insightful discussion on the English Learning Podcast, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep engaging with the world of knowledge.